Hi everyone, and welcome back to Inside number 23, my podcast which is all about knitting and sewing and generally living the craftiest life possible. My name is Katie and you can find me pretty much everywhere on social media as Miss Lavelli, although I'm most active on Instagram. You can find a Ravelry group for this podcast by heading over to Ravelry, hitting the groups tab and searching Inside number 23, and that's where you can get involved in things like giveaways and sew-alongs and all of that good stuff. And in terms of show notes for the podcast, you can find those in the down bar just down below. I am coming to you, as always, from Hertfordshire, which is just north of London in the UK, where I live with my husband Emrys and our pug puppy Rolly, both of whom make appearances on the podcast every so often. And I just want to say a huge welcome back to my long-term viewers and a big hello and welcome if this is the first time that you are checking out my podcast. Thank you so much for coming to spend a little bit of crafty time with me this week. I am so excited to be with you this week. I have had another hectic week. I know that you guys are going to start getting fed up with me when I keep saying, oh, it's been a crazy week, but it really has. We are coming into my favourite month of all time, which is September. It's my birthday month. I am really excited. And as far as I'm concerned, the second that we hit September 1st, which is when this video will be going live, so September, it's autumn. I make the switch that quickly from summer to autumn. I know officially that's not the case, but as far as I'm concerned, the second that it turns September, we're in autumn and I am happy. It has been kind of crazy though for various reasons, mostly because I'm still decorating, you guys. It's been going really well, but it's taking up a huge amount of my time, but I'm loving it. I was shopping for blinds online this morning and I can't tell you how much joy that brought me, but Inside number 23 HQ, which will be the office that I'm currently decorating, is coming along and I can't wait to share it with you relatively soon. It's gonna be great. I can't wait, and it's such a lovely space and everything's looking so organised and the amount of storage I have is incredible. But that to one side, I have managed to do some crafting this week, so I have some fun things to share with you. So let's crack on with a little bit of administrative stuff before we get on to what you're really here for, the crafty content. So I wanted to remind you guys of a couple of things. I do have the Harry Potter cal, which is an ongoing cal for this podcast. It's a year-long knit-along, crochet-along, kind of anything fibre-based along, all to do with Harry Potter, the details of which I have a little video of down below, or you can head to Ravelry and check out the knit-along threads to see there. But I draw prize winners at the end of every month. So I will be drawing the August prize winner next week. So do make sure that all of your entries are in and I will get that drawn next week, so good luck for that. I also have a competition open for tickets to the Sewing Bee Live. They are for the Friday of the Sewing Bee Live, and all of the details of that giveaway are also in the Ravelry group, so please head on over, enter, get involved, because I will be drawing the winner of that in next week's episode as well. So exciting. One more thing before we get on to all of the crafty bits and pieces. I just want to send some huge, massive amounts of love out to a couple of fellow podcasters who just blow my mind with their creativity and their amazingness. And the two ladies in particular that I want to mention this week are lovely Ellie of the Deer Knits podcast and gorgeous Jacqueline of Brooklyn Knit Folk. Now, both of these women are incredibly talented podcasters, beautiful, prolific crafters in general, but they are also additionally awesome in my eyes because they are both writers of knitting patterns, and I just think that that is an incredible skill. They are both wonderful and I am so happy to be able to show them my support and my love. So congratulations, ladies, you are amazing. I'm so happy that your patterns are coming out. Ellie of Deer Knits is actually doing a mittens club, which is incredible, because if you don't know Ellie, you really should check her out on Instagram because her colour work is to die for. She is such a talented lady. She's inspired me to pick up colour work, even though it's kind of one of my nemesis. I love colour work, but I do have a bit of a love-hate relationship. It's the Marmite of my knitting world, you might say. But she is just so good at what she does, and her mittens club is designed to basically introduce you to colourwork mittens and improve your skills month by month when you are sent a new pattern. And I just think it's an incredible idea, and I think it's a lovely idea as well, because the whole point is that then you'll have a selection of mittens that you can gift to people for Christmas, and it's just perfect on so many levels. I will most definitely be getting involved in this club. Ellie was kind enough to send me a copy of it. I'm so excited because obviously when this goes live, I believe the first pattern will have been released. I need to get some yarn. I need to get some yarn specifically for these projects and finish up my current colourwork mittens, but then I will be jumping on Ellie's bandwagon and getting involved. Perhaps a knit along or mitt along may be in order, you guys. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. But all of this to one side, in addition to giving me a copy of the club, Ellie has also kindly donated one to you lovely people. So we have a giveaway that is opening this week for Ellie's beautiful mittens. So please head over to my Ravelry group and enter the giveaway thread. I haven't decided on the question just yet that you will be answering, but just head over to Ravelry and find the Skein Deer Knits giveaway thread and enter to be within the chance of winning the Mittens Club, and I will be drawing a winner for that next week as well. Goodness, there's going to be a lot of winners being drawn next week, but yes, get involved. Obviously, in addition to lovely Ellie, we have Jacqueline, who announced her first ever knitting pattern this past week. And I just have to say, Jacqueline, congratulations, because this pattern is an absolute triumph. It's called the Clark Socks, and they are gorgeous. They have cables, they have different kind of texture and pattern. They are absolutely beautiful. And in addition to this, the thing I love about Jacqueline and everything that she does is that she has such a beautiful sense of style, and her aesthetic just appeals to me on so many levels. I've already seen multiple versions of this pattern being knitted up on Instagram, and it's glorious. And Jacqueline, as well as gifting this pattern to me, so thank you so much, Jacqueline, actually also gifted this pattern to you guys. So guess what? You have double the opportunity to win a prize this week, because I will also be opening a giveaway thread for Jacqueline's beautiful sock pattern. So head over to Ravelry, check out Jacqueline's post, the Brooklyn Knit Folk giveaway post and the Skein Deer Knits giveaway post. Enter both of them because you stand the chance of winning something pretty fantastic both ways. And honestly, if you haven't checked out both Ellie and Jacqueline and their respective podcasts, you really, really should, because I adore both of them. They are wonderful. Go and show them some love, go and show them some support. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Righty-ho, I think it's time that we move on to some crafty content. And this week, there isn't a what am I wearing segment, because you'll probably notice I am not wearing anything me made this week. I know, it's a little bit strange, but I've been doing a lot of odd jobs and painting and that type of thing, and I really don't want my me-made outfits getting covered in paint, so it's all kind of shop-bought stuff today. But that doesn't matter, because we're going to be moving straight on to what's on my needles. And this week, very much like last week, it appears that I have been a monogamous again. A lot of monogamous knitting going on. I'm very much in the frame of mind to get things finished rather than start new projects, even though I am chomping at the bit to start some new projects. Honestly, all I can think about is casting on a cable knit cardigan for the autumn winter as the weather starts to change. It's completely filling my brain. But first and foremost, I know that I need to get some projects off the needles, and the one knitting project that has been getting some love this week is my Oracle shawl, which is a stunning pie shawl by the incredible Kristin of Voolenvine yarns. And to be perfectly honest, this project really contains quite a lot of guilt as well as a lot of love and admiration and overall awesomeness, because it is absolutely beautiful and I love working on it. The guilt comes from the fact that I was a test knitter for this pattern, and it was released a few weeks ago and I am still plugging away at it and it's not finished, and I feel utterly awful about it, mostly because I consider Kristin as a very, very good friend, and so I feel like I've kind of let her down in this, but also because, you know, I'm just the worst test knitter around. I really need to not do test knits because knitting to any form of schedule or knitting on demand really just apparently doesn't work for me. But all of that to one side, this pattern, you guys, oh my goodness. It looks a bit funny on its needle right now because it's like a kind of shopping bag. I have it on a much smaller circular needle than the total circumference of this pie shawl, and I can already tell it's going to be freaking huge when it is kind of blocked out. But at the moment it's this kind of lovely jellyfish. Here he is, my jellyfish oracle shawl, and I love this pattern. It's a combination of brioche and lace, and I am knitting this in 3 skeins of Kristin's own yarn, Voolenvine yarns. The kind of mauvey pink colour is Fairie hair, the black is Grim, and then this beautiful pale speckled colour that I have throughout the brioche section here is Enjoy the Silence. And I think Enjoy the Silence is pretty much my favourite colour in this. I love the whole thing. It makes me so happy and it's going to be glorious to wear. I cannot wait for it to be finished. But Enjoy the Silence has a very special place in my heart. I just love knitting with it and seeing the little pops of colour kind of coming out as I go around. And there are a lot of stitches on this needle right now, as you can see, which is probably one of the reasons why it's been languishing as well, because the idea of knitting all of those stitches is quite intimidating. But also, even if I do pick it up in the evening to knit, say, a few rows could take half an hour, could take an hour, because there's a lot of stitches on here. But I love it. It's on Kristin's singles base. This is her Nouveau base, which is, yes, I believe 100% merino singles. It is beautiful and I love it, but I am desperate, absolutely desperate to get this off the needles. Firstly, to kind of push my guilt to one side and finally be able to say, look, Kristin, I finished it and I'm not the worst test knitter in the world, but also just because it's such an epic kind of project. I mean, it's going to be ginormous when it's finished and I want to wear it. I want to wear it around the house. I think it's going to be something really, really nice to keep my shoulders warm when I'm kind of working on the computer and that type of thing at home. It's going to be wonderful. But yes, it's just, it's glorious. And at the moment, this is the only shawl project that I have on the needles. Once it is finished, I think there's a possibility I may be casting on the Sizzle Pop shawl, which is another brioche project, because I do have a couple of skeins of Twisted Finch that I really, really want to use for that particular shawl. But right now, this is kind of everything. And it has become my pretty much monogamous knitting project, just because I want to put as much time and effort into it as is physically possible to get it finished, so I can get it blocked, so I can get it photographed, so I can celebrate the awesomeness of this pattern. But if you haven't already checked it out, you really, really should. It's the Oracle Shawl by Kristin of Voolenvine Yarns, and yes, I do not have enough good words to say about this. It's just everything. Ah! Hello, friend. So yeah, not a lot of knitting, but the knitting that I have done has been full of love and joy and with the goal of getting things finished, which is very much where my headset is at the moment. Obviously, in terms of what I'm doing in the house, I want to get everything in a beautiful condition and organised and kind of in a really good space. And that energy is kind of transferred into my crafting. So with the knitting, I'm very much focusing on single projects at a time rather than spreading myself across multiple objects. And that has now also transferred into my sewing, because we do have So What this week, because I, in the process of setting up my new study, have been doing an overhaul in my sewing room, which is this room here. It's a very little teeny tiny little kind of box room, but it has enough space for all of my sewing supplies, and it's just left me feeling really, really inspired to start new things, obviously, but also to finish old things. So I have been working on one particular project this week in terms of getting something off the cutting table and into the wardrobe. Now this is a project that a lot of you will have seen before because I have shared it a couple of times on the podcast previously, but the project that I have been spending the majority of my time on this week is the Mélilot shirt by Deer and Doe, and I'm a very, very big fan of Deer and Doe patterns. Obviously my number one kind of favourite pattern is the robe bluet, which is a dress which I have made 3 versions of the dress. I've also hacked it into a blouse. I love that pattern. This is the second of the patterns by Deer and Doe that I've actually used, and I just really, really enjoy their designs. I think that they're beautiful, and I think that they create really wearable but interesting garments with little kind of fun elements to them, and also they're very, very good at furthering your technique because they often include skills that are relatively simple but can be kind of built up. So this shirt, for example, the Mélilot shirt, has 2 different versions, the short sleeved and the long sleeve version. So depending on which one you go for, there are varying degrees of difficulty in this. It has the possibility to be really quite simple or much more complicated depending on which version you pick. And that's just a really nice option to have because it feels like it's a development pattern rather than just something that's completely out of anybody's reach. But the version that I decided to make is kind of a combination of both the long sleeved and the short sleeved version. Version B is really the one that I stuck with the most because I wanted to have the shorter sleeves. However, I took the collar from version A because this one does not have a collar, and I also just wanted 1 breast pocket rather than 2, which is also what version A has. And I am using this fabric. Oh, this fabric makes me so happy. This was some of the fabric that I purchased during our time in New York earlier this year. I purchased this from Brooklyn General Store. It's a Rifle Paper Company fabric, but it is so soft and silky and glorious, and it's going to completely blow out the camera if I show this a lot on screen. But I have done a considerable amount of work, so much so that I can pretty much guarantee that by the time I podcast next week, this is going to be finished. So I have done the main construction on the shirt itself. So I have attached the shirt front to the shirt back. All of that was done using French seams, which are just glorious. A really, really lovely seam finish for a fabric that's this delicate. I have also added the little cuffs onto the sleeves. These don't have sleeves cut in because the shoulder it's a dropped sleeve, if you see what I mean, so it's all in one piece. So I've added these little cuffs on. That was all done over the last couple of days. It also has the little pocket detailing on the front. So basically the only things that I have left to do on this shirt are the construction of the collar. I have the collar stand pieces and the collar piece itself. Those have all been interfaced and they're ready to sew. And when that is done, I will just need to sew all of the buttons and the buttonholes onto this. And I'm actually quite excited about the buttons and buttonholes because the buttons are actually coming out of quite old stash. I do have a collection of buttons that I've been working on for quite some time, adding to that collection quite a lot over the years. And I have some really nice, very simple white buttons. They kind of walk the line between being white and iridescent, which is nice, but I managed to pick up some thread which is almost exactly the same colour as the flamingos on this shirt, which means that all of my buttons will be sewn on using that colour. I'm also very tempted to actually stitch the buttonholes themselves in that colour. I'm not sure how I feel about that though, so I may need to test that on some scrap fabric before I do it, but at the very least the buttons themselves will be sewn on with the kind of corally pink fabric to match the flamingos. So very, very soon I'm going to have this beautiful airy drapey shirt in my wardrobe, and I really don't have anything like this in my wardrobe currently, so it's definitely filling a gap, and I just think it's going to be glorious. I also think it will be really nice as it starts to get colder to kind of put cardigans over the top of it, which is another reason that I'm really, really wanting something kind of oversized in the cardigan department or the sweater department. But I just love this. I can't wait for it to be finished. and it's really been lovely to get back to the sewing machine and starting to get some sewing works in progress well on their way to being finished. So yeah, pretty much a monogamous with both my knitting and my sewing, because all of my time is pretty much being spent with singular projects, and I don't know how long that's going to last, but right now it's giving me a lot of joy just to focus my energies on small amounts of projects and really be able to see the development of them over a week, because it feels like my time for crafting just gets smaller and smaller and smaller the more kind of additional things I start doing around the house and in work and in life in general. So at least with doing just small amounts on a few projects, I know that I can see the development on them, so I don't feel like I've done nothing. For my next segment, I thought it would be fun to answer some Dear Katie questions. Now, Dear Katie is the interactive segment of this podcast in which I answer emails. I answer questions rather that have been emailed to me to katie@insidenumber23.com, which is my email address for this podcast. So any questions or general inquiries about the podcast, please do feel free to drop me an email, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you want one of the questions to be answered on the Dear Katie segment, if you just put Dear Katie in the subject, in the title, so I will know that it is okay for me to read your question out on the podcast. And please be aware that sending me a question doesn't guarantee that it's going to be answered on the podcast. I may have to email you back directly, and it may take a while for it to be answered, because a lot of them I do kind of stockpile for weeks when I know that I'm going to be answering a few questions. So bear all of that in mind, but please do send me an email if you'd like to get involved. I have a couple of questions to answer this week, and I have them all on my phone here. So starting off, I have an email from Caitlin. So thank you so much, Caitlin, for your message. And you say, I love knitting socks, but after so much effort, I want people, even my non-knitting friends, to be able to wear them and wash them without too much trouble and without the pattern pilling up next to no time. Can you recommend any yarn bases or fibre mixes or specific yarn I should look out for? Now, this is quite, I think, a debatable question. I didn't quite know where I was going with that when I started that word. I have heard a lot of people give different opinions on hand knit socks and that type of thing. So I'm just going to give you my opinion. This is not kind of set in stone, and there are no hard and fast rules for these kinds of things, other than it may not be the best idea to make a pair of socks in cashmere and then throw them in the washing machine and wash them at high heat and expect that nothing's going to go wrong. You know, those kind of things I think are pretty much written in stone. But I do think that you will find a lot of people that have different thoughts on what's appropriate for sock knitting. So like I said, I'm just going to give you kind of my perspective on what I do with sock yarn. I do use indie dyed yarn for socks, and I will only usually use it if it has some kind of nylon content and it is obviously a superwash yarn. You can by all means knit socks out of non-superwash yarn, but pretty much all of my socks go through a cool cycle on my washing machine, and I just wouldn't want to risk kind of non-superwash wool in my washing machine, and my life is too short to hand wash every single pair of hand knit socks that I own. I must admit, some socks do get the luxury of a hand wash every so often if they are particular favourites and I want to be a bit precious with them, but I have a very busy life and I really don't have the time or the inclination to hand wash all of my socks. No offence whatsoever if that's something that you do and that you want to do to protect your own socks. Like I said, this is all just my opinion. So from that perspective, I will only go for socks that have nylon content and are superwash yarns. In terms of fibre content, I do have a lot of the traditional superwash merino nylon, kind of 70-30 or 80-20 blends of those. But one of my particular favourite yarns just in general is BFL, Blueface Leicester yarn. And if you can get superwash BFL and nylon, I really think that that's going to kind of be the dream sock yarn, at least it is from my perspective, because BFL is a lot kind of more I would say not hard wearing because it's not a rough yarn, but I do think it can kind of take a walloping more than merino has. I think it has more structure to it, which is why it's probably my favourite yarn of all time. I love Blue Face Leicester. But that's kind of from an indie dyed yarn perspective. If you're at all worried about what's going to happen to your socks kind of long term, you might want to think about investing in some kind of more inexpensive big brand yarns. So for example, I have a lot of the self-striping Arnie and Carlos yarn, which is made by Regia, so I know that this is kind of a lot more hard wearing than a lot of yarns because it is mass produced, it's more commercial. So you might want to look into that kind of yarn if you're really concerned about pilling and about socks not being able to be taken care of. For non-knitting friends, if you think that they are literally going to want to chuck their socks into a hot wash and not want to dry them flat and just kind of treat them like we treat store-bought socks, you might want to consider even taking it to the next extreme and investing in something that's kind of got a higher nylon or acrylic content than a wool content. It's not something that I would say is a necessity, but I would say very much bear in mind who you are knitting the item for. If you know that they're going to really appreciate it and take as much care of it as they can, you know, they don't have to necessarily hand wash it every single time, but the amount of hours and the effort that you're going to put into knitting those socks for a person, you want to make sure that all of your hard work isn't undone because somebody just doesn't really want to take the time in any aspect of taking care of them. So I think it very much kind of depends on who you're knitting them for as well. If they're for yourself and you're going to kind of want to take care of them but not to a huge amount, like I said, superwash yarn is your friend of all kind of kinds, and I would say ideally with a little bit of nylon content just so that you know it's going to be hard wearing and last for a long time. Just my opinion. My second question is a little bit awkward because I don't know how to pronounce your name and I'm so sorry. I believe it might be Eike, E-I-K-E, and if I've horrendously mispronounced that, I am so sorry, but thank you so much for your email. And you, first of all, said some really, really lovely things about the podcast, so thank you for that. But your question was, you might have answered it before and it may just be a total simple and a one-sentence answer, but here goes. Why/how did you choose the name inside number 23 and your username Miss Lavelli? It may just be the number of your house and your surname, but I was wondering whether there is a story behind these names. Well, it is going to be a one-sentence answer because number 23 is actually our house number. It's the first house that Emrys and I have ever owned together. We did live together before we lived in number 23, but yeah, that's our house number. And I wanted kind of a title for this podcast that would encompass all of what I do here. So I didn't want to get too specific in terms of this is a knitting podcast or this is a sewing podcast, even though it's really those are the main things that I talk about. I wanted it to be able to be an umbrella under which I could express all kinds of different things, which is where inside number 23 came from. And in terms of my username, Miss Lavelli, Lavelli is my maiden name. So that is just the kind of title that I've always had in life as I was growing up. I think that it's probably because growing up with a first name Katie and a second name Lavelli, people automatically gravitate towards the surname because it's much more interesting than the first name. So almost for my entire life I was known as Miss Lavelli as opposed to just Katie, so that's where that came from. It was just the most natural progression, and even though I have changed my name after being married, it's something that represents me still, so I'm happy to continue using it even if it's just over social media or kind of being linked to this podcast, I guess. Thank you so much for your question, and yeah, sorry, but it was a super simple answer. My final Dear Katie question today was sent to me by Pat, so thank you for getting in touch, Pat, and your question was as follows. You've shared some lovely clothing items that you've made and many of them are in cotton. Do you have to spend a lot of time at your ironing board to deal with the wrinkles? which kind of made me laugh because this was one of those questions that really was something that I had never thought about really at all. So I had to kind of take a step back and think, do I spend a lot of time kind of ironing clothes and that type of thing? So I'm going to let you in on a little secret, Pat. In terms of my handmade items, a lot of them, in particular kind of dresses, because I would say the majority of things that I make in cotton are going to be things like the dresses. So my Robe Bluet dresses are all made in cotton fabric. A lot of the time I wear them, and if they don't smell really bad, they will just get hung up and worn again before they get washed, because that's the type of person that I am. I am okay with that, and obviously if they get really mucky, which they don't because I'm very careful in my handmade garments, or if they're getting a bit whiffy, then I'm going to wash them. But I don't wash dresses and things like that every single time that I wear them, particularly with handmade garments. I think overwashing really, really reduces the lifespan of a lot of garments. And I think that unless you're wearing something directly against your skin, or it's a kind of more intimate garment, my personal opinion is that they don't need to be washed every time. So basically, I will give my garments a really nice press and iron after they are freshly washed. So in general, I will wash all of my handmade items, dresses in particular. I'll always pre-wash my fabric. So washing them later is never a problem, but I'll wash them on like a 30 degrees temperature, so nice and low. I won't put them in a spin cycle. I will hang them up to dry. And little things like that basically mean that they don't crease a huge amount because they're hung to dry. After I've worn an item, it will automatically straight away get hung up in my wardrobe, and a lot of the creases tend to drop out when they're hung. So I don't really find myself needing to iron my garments a huge amount. And if they do look a little bit creased, particularly around the butt area, because obviously if you're sitting on something, it's going to get more creased than the rest of the item. It's never something that I've noticed, but that's probably because the creases are all behind me on my bum, and no one has been kind of mean enough to say, oh, you've got a really creased bum. So I don't think I spend a huge amount of time ironing, but I think it's all based on the type of cotton that you are using. I think cotton has a really bad rep for being quite a stiff fabric that creases very easily, and yes, as it has a lot of natural fibre content, it is going to crease. However, in terms of the quality of the cotton that you're buying, a lot of the cottons that I use are incredibly drapey, very soft, and they don't just crease when you just look at them. So yeah, I think it's all kind of subjective when you're working with different cotton fabrics, but in my experience, it's either just not something that I'm aware of at all, or it's not really a problem. But either way, I don't iron things all the time. We have one more segment before I move on to the final part of the podcast, and I'm excited to say it's the return of resting stitch face this week, because I have been doing a little bit of cross stitching. Now, the main kind of driving force, I suppose, for this cross stitch extravaganza that's been going on recently for me is I am making some cross stitch designs to hang up in the room that I've been decorating. So the need to get them finished and on the wall is quite strong in me. But I really wanted to show you first of all that I have completely finished my office suite office cross stitch. Now, for those of you who have watched before, this is something that I have shown on a previous episode of the podcast, all of the cross stitch finish, but I have finally finished it in terms of getting it ready to hang, and here it is. Isn't it glorious? So the exciting thing about this is this embroidery hoop was just the natural wood embroidery hoop, which you usually kind of get from any crafting store. But what I decided that I wanted was to paint it white, because the walls in this room are now white, and all of the frames that I'm going to be hanging on the wall are white as well. So I wanted this to match. So I basically just popped on 2 coats of a gloss white paint that I have been using on a couple of different things around the house recently in terms of decorating, and I have popped that back on and I think it looks perfect. I'm so happy with how that's turned out. I know it's a very little thing, but for me, the devil is in the detail. This type of thing would have driven me mad if it didn't match. But also, I have very neatly stitched the back of the linen up to make sure that it doesn't ever kind of come off the frame and that it's nicely kind of kept in place. And to do that, I basically sewed a running stitch around the kind of more outer edge of the linen. I tightened that up and I tied the edges off. And then just to neaten it up even further, I trimmed the excess linen off and then I stitched down each one of these little folds that were created by the running stitch and the gathering so that it sits nice and flat. As you can see, it's not taking up a huge amount of space and bulk. And that is now ready to hang in my office. And like I said, I couldn't be happier. It's just like so perfect now, and I'm really happy to be able to have something up in that room that I made, that I'm really proud of, that's just so ridiculously cute and pretty, because oh my goodness, this is amazing. And yeah, making me very happy indeed. So hurrah for finally properly finishing that piece of cross stitch. But that is not the only cross stitch that I've been working on, because I do have another little sampler that I'm wanting to hang in the office as well. And this one, let me just pop it out of its bag. I've got threads dangling from it, is definitely close to being completed now. This is my feminist sampler, which is just beautiful. So we have feminist across here. I have finished all of the flowers along the bottom and I'm now working my way along the flowers along the top. So you can see I'm pretty much halfway done in terms of the flowers at the top. So again, I envision that probably by next week this will also be finished and maybe even be hung up on the wall. How amazing would that be? But I love this pattern. It's so pretty and I just love how kind of classic the flowers are, but the colours really make it look very modern and fun. Plus, I just love the word feminist for various reasons, because I am one. But this pattern, like the Office Suite Office pattern, is by an amazing company called Plastic Little Covers, which has an Etsy store. So if you are into this type of thing and kind of pop culture references and other beautiful things to do with cross stitch, I would very much recommend checking out Plastic Little Covers. And I'm just loving working on this. It's a really nice break from my knitting at the moment. I have you may or may not recall, one of the reasons I stopped knitting on the Oracle shawl originally was because I hurt my neck. I had pain in my neck and my shoulder, which is now completely gone. It's a miracle, but unfortunately I managed to injure my wrist in work this week, lifting a lot of heavy stock and moving things around and reorganizing, and it probably hasn't helped by the amount of lifting and reorganizing and that type of thing I've been doing at home as well. And I have these pretty kind of skinny wrists. They're not really that bulky in any way, even though there are parts of the rest of my body that are definitely more bulky. I have skinny little wrists that have no strength, so I've managed to kind of strain my left wrist a little bit. So to kind of take the strain off of it, having just a little bit of cross stitch and then a little bit of knitting is kind of using different parts of my hands and my wrist and my arms to prevent me from experiencing large amounts of pain and basically exacerbating this and making it any worse. So fingers crossed that's not going to get any worse, because the last time that happened I pretty much had nothing to share on the podcast at all. But yes, I'm really loving this. I think when I finish this, I do have my Halloween cross stitch, which I will want to spend a little bit of time on, but it might be that there may be a little bit of a break in terms of my cross stitch content, because my goal really is to make sure that this and my Office Suite Office sampler are finished to be able to display in the new office. And then I may want to dedicate some of the cross stitching time to just knitting and sewing, because the bug is bitten me again and I'm very inspired right now. So that is everything in terms of creative content for this week, but I am going to be closing with my final segment, which is, as always, General Waffle. General Waffle. And for my General Waffle this week, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that has been bringing me so much happiness over the past couple of weeks. It's kind of ridiculous, and that is reading. I don't know what has come over me recently, because for those of you who are long-term viewers of the podcast, you will already know this, but for anyone who is new, I was a huge bookworm as a child. It wasn't uncommon for me to be walking around at school with all of my school books kind of in one arm, and then either in the other arm or kind of balanced on top of my school books would be several novels or other books that I would just be reading myself. I would carry, this was before we had things like Kindles and iPads that you could just have all of your books on electronically. You used to have to carry all of these books around with you all the time, and I just loved it. I've always been a very, very big reader, but for some reason, the older I've gotten, the more difficult it has been for me to pick up a book. It's almost like I have kind of book aversion, but every time I start reading, I remember just how much I love it, and that's definitely been helped by being a member of Audible, the audiobook app through which you can purchase audiobooks and listen to them on your phone. But I have really, really, really kind of rediscovered a love for actual solid books over the past couple of weeks, and it's been making me so happy. And I just wanted to kind of highlight two books that I have read recently, because I love them, but just in general, I do think that books are probably going to be more mentioned on the podcast, because I can't tell you how amazing it is to kind of finish a book, that feeling of satisfaction when you come to the end of a book, even though it's kind of sad at the same time. But there are two books that have really re-caught my attention, because one of them I actually started a long time ago, and I did mention it on the podcast when I first started it, but I never finished it. And one of them, which is definitely a newer book, but I have recently completed reading it. So I'm going to start with the newer book, and that is All That She Can See by Carrie Hope Fletcher. Now, I love Carrie Hope Fletcher. I think she's amazing. She is a YouTuber, she is an actress, and she is an author. She is an incredible woman who wears a variety of hats and is multi-talented, and I just find that type of a person very attractive. I'm very drawn to people who not only are talented but display multiple talents and are very prolific in everything that they do. I have a lot of time for her, and I think she's amazing. So that is my bias. As an author, this is the third book that she has written. This is the second novel that she's written, because the first book was more, I suppose, a kind of advice book. Not really a self-help book, but more a kind of looking at some issues that you might experience in life and looking at how to deal with them, which was lovely. I've read every single one of her books. I know that there are only 3, but I have read all of them. And the first novel that she wrote was a book called On the Other Side, which I really, really enjoyed. She has a lovely way of writing that walks the line between reality and fantasy, and there are lots of magical elements to her writing that I really, really enjoy. So I was very excited when All That She Can See was released, because this is very much kind of in the same universe as On the Other Side, in terms of there are some kind of magical qualities, but it's still very much based in quite a real world. My thoughts on it: I absolutely adored it when I was starting it. I thought that the characters were incredible, the character development was interesting. I must say, it takes a bit of a turn towards the last third of the book, and I didn't find the ending as satisfying as I thought I would. And that's because really it ended up in a very, very different place than I was expecting it to. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing, but I think I would have enjoyed it more if it had taken the route that I was anticipating. But all of that to one side, I think that Carrie is a really, really fresh new writer. I do think that she shows a lot of development between On the Other Side and All That She Can See. This feels more mature. It feels, without sounding too kind of bleh, it feels like she's had some life experience that has given her characters more depth. Which is really, really interesting, and to be honest, it's just really nice to kind of feel that I'm experiencing her development as a writer along with her as she writes books. And I'll probably continue to read everything that she writes, just because I am a big fangirl of hers. But I would very much recommend this book, first of all, if you've read her initial book, but secondly, if you just like things that are kind of slightly unexpected, that slightly broaden your horizons and your perspectives on things. And yeah, plus it's got a lot of baking in it, so that really appealed to me. So yes, it's very quick reading, I would say. For me, I could have read this a lot faster than I did, but it was pretty much a commuter book or occasional little bits of reading for an hour or so in the evenings or in the bath. I do read books in the bath, but yes, really enjoyed it. I'm very, very pleased and proud to have finished a book for the first time in ages, because the next book that I'm going to talk about is this one, Giovanna Fletcher. And if the name sounds familiar, it's because Giovanna Fletcher is actually Carrie Hope Fletcher's sister-in-law. Yes, it's all very kind of family linked in terms of the people that I read their books. I'll only read them if they're related to each other. Not at all. I found out about Giovanna Fletcher actually through Carrie Hope Fletcher's YouTube channel, because Giovanna Fletcher also has a YouTube channel. So does her husband, Tom Fletcher, who is Tom from McFly. So if you've seen that very, very famous video of Tom from McFly singing his wedding speech to his wife, Giovanna Fletcher is his wife. And if you haven't seen that video, you really should, because it makes me cry like nobody's business. It's insane. It's amazing. You should watch it. It's viral for a reason. But anyway, this is one of Giovanna Fletcher's kind of real life honest books. She mostly writes fiction, and I have read pretty much every novel that she has written and very much enjoyed them. They are, again, on the lighter side. There's nothing kind of super intense in them, but they have a lot of heart and a lot of soul. And again, I'm a big fan of Giovanna Fletcher herself, so my admiration and my enjoyment of her more personal stuff automatically carries across into her writing, and I can kind of hear her voice through them, so that's why I enjoy them. This book is slightly different. The kind of tagline is My Adventures in Motherhood. So this is all about her experiences of wanting to have children, the process of getting pregnant, actually having her children, and going from a parent of just one child to then having two. And I just find it utterly fascinating. It's interesting because when I say that I've read this kind of a book, people automatically assume that there's going to be an announcement in a couple of months, and I can say right off the bat there isn't. Emrys and I are not planning to get pregnant anytime soon, but I don't think that that means that you can't appreciate the experiences of a woman who has gone through motherhood, and it's just something that I have no experience of, other than the fact that I am also, you know, a mother to my precious baby pug. I don't really think that the two things are that comparable though, because I didn't, you know, carry him for 9 months and give birth to him. However much I love him, and however much I think that I could never love a human child as much as I love him. But it's just fascinating to hear a very, very honest representation of what motherhood means to one particular individual. So from that perspective, I would really, really recommend this to anybody who has kids, who's thinking about having kids, who even just has a vague interest in maybe having children, or just a vague interest in children in general, or who likes Giovanna Fletcher and maybe has read some of her previous work. If you have no interest in hearing about what it's like to have kids, that's probably you wouldn't be someone I'd recommend this book to, for obvious reasons. But I enjoy it, and like I said, it's the honesty of it that gets me. It's something that I can only read in small amounts, just because some of the emotion in here is really quite raw and quite ugly. You know, a lot of the time when we're talking about having children, it's like it's a blessing and they're a gift, and even when they're difficult you just think, oh, they're wonderful. And that, I think, is a really lovely way to look at it, but I don't think it's necessarily a 100% truth for all women at all times with their kids, because my goodness, again, not speaking from experience, but just from an outsider's perspective, it looks really hard, and I have a huge amount of respect for anybody who takes that leap to become a parent, whether you're a mother or a father, because that is a huge commitment, and reading this book has really brought that home to me. and just given me a newfound kind of perspective, and also just a huge amount of respect for parents in general, because whew, hard work, very, very hard. So yeah, books are coming back into my life with a real vengeance. I do want to try and find some really good new books to read, so if you have any recommendations, please feel free to give them to me. I am very much in a kind of true crime phase of what I want to read in terms of what I'm listening to. I just finished listening to the audiobook of No Stone Unturned, which, if you are into true crime and forensics, oh my goodness, it's the best thing that I have ever listened to. But if any of you have any similar kind of books that you think, if you've read this book, No Stone Unturned, and you know of similar books in that genre, I would be absolutely fascinated to hear about them. So let me know if you have done. But yeah, let me know what your favourite book is. If you think that it's something that I'd be interested in, leave a little description of what it is and maybe I'll give it a go, because I just really want to read everything. And now I have such a long commute to and from work, and it's all on public transport. Reading is a definite option if I don't just want to listen to back episodes of My Favourite Murder, which is essentially what I do pretty much every day, but it'd be nice to kind of mix it up a little bit and have some variety. So guys, that is everything for my episode this week. Thank you so much for watching, as always. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give me a thumbs up or hit subscribe, or do both. All of those little options are just down below. Subscribing is a very good idea because you will be kept up to date whenever there's a new video on this channel. So yeah, do that, because I think that there's going to be some new content coming soon, which is very, very exciting. But for now, I hope you all have an incredible week. I have even more exciting stuff to share with you next week. I already know some of the content for next week's episode and it's going to be really cool and I can't wait. But for now, I hope you all have a really, really lovely couple of days until we speak next. Happy sewing, happy knitting, and I'll see you all soon. Bye! Different angle, isn't it? I'm not sure what I think of it, but I think I quite like it. That downwards angle doing me all kinds of favours around the neck area.